I decided I wanted to add Frankenstein's monster to my Halloween display this year, and so I started, as I always do, by sketching out a few ideas, and then I got an oversized skull that I covered in plastic, put on top of a bucket to create sort of a neck piece, and then used masking tape to start finding the details of the skull. The more details from the the armature underneath that you can capture, those things will then telegraph through the foam once we get that layer on, and you'll be able to maintain them for your final sculpture. This monster has always captured my imagination. I read the Mary Shelley's novel in college, and I've always loved Herman Munster and the Universal Boris Karloff monster. It's just really an interesting story, and it captures the imagination. There's so many different versions of him out there. Once your Loctite is in place, spray it with some water, allow it to cure for about 5 minutes, and then you can just press that down to create a shell over top of your armature. The story explores so many interesting themes about whether or not, we're delving into scientific developments that maybe we shouldn't. And I think it's probably pretty relevant today, especially. Allow your shell to cure for a while and it becomes rigid, and we can start thinking about how we want to make our face. But before you put any detail on, you want to remove that shell from the armature. So I just slid it down the back and up to the top of the head. It hasn't completely cured at this point, so you can see it's still flexible without cracking it too much. And I just sort of wiggle it out, and I can use that skull again for other projects. Now I want to close up the seam in the back with a little bit of additional tape, and then we can fill that head in with some foam. I also place a 3/4 inch PVC pipe as a neck so that I can later on join that head into the final body. Now this seam that you saw in the back there, we do cover that. I cover that in some additional Loctite foam and seal it down so that it is again solid. And then I start using some paper clay and some eyes that I actually made the eyes out of polymer clay, covered them in a layer of resin so that they're nice and shiny, and then just hot glued them in place until I could get the paper clay down over top. Now, this paper clay, I've heard people say that it cracks. I haven't had an issue with it. And in circumstances where I have had it cracked, I've just filled it in, and it's been fine. Now, I would say that, there are several layers of paint over top of this in the final version, and I feel like that really keeps it makes it more weather resistant if you're going to put this prop outside. So part of the beauty of working with Loctite is I just created some ears out of some tin foil, hot glued them in place, and I could cover those in a layer of Loctite and follow very much the same process in order to be able to create and edit the sculpture. I felt the forehead wasn't large enough as I was looking at the sculpture, and so I added one. And I continued to add layers of paper clay as it dries, just using a little bit of water and stepping back and looking at my sculpture. I do have some references that I was looking at as well. I wanted to make a type of Frankenstein's monster that was bigger and beefier than maybe the one that's described in Shelley's book, for instance, or even the one that's pictured in the films, the black and white films. I like to paint by basing the whole sculpture out in first black, and then, before I based it out, I covered his eyes and those items I didn't want painted, but with a little bit of masking tape. But then I come back and I start dry brushing layers of color until I get something that I think I like. It was time to move on to the torso. The painting wasn't quite finished on the head, as well as the details, but I wanted to try to color match everything together, and so I started working on the torso. You can see I used an armature there and followed very much the same process as I did for the head. I'm just sort of working it slowly around my hands in there to separate the plastic layer from the original armature. I have a mannequin torso that I sometimes use for this. That particular one, I then put a piece of 3/4-inch PVC with a receptacle that could receive the piece that I described that I used as the neck. And then I foamed it in place. He was beginning to come together, and I added some arms, and I created some hands following sort of a similar process with Loctite foam. I actually end up removing those later, you might notice in the video, and I replaced them with a pair of Hulk hands. They were a type of glove. Here you can see that my son had left over from when he was little. Frankenstein's legs were, again, some 3/4-inch PVC piping that I screwed 1/2-inch screws into and started bulking out with some boxes and tape, and then a little bit of additional Loctite foam. I'm showing you here that the lower legs, the legs rather, and the torso are separated, and they will remain that way because he's just so large. Moving him up and down stairs, it requires him to be separated into two pieces. I actually asked ChatGPT to tell me the dimensions on the legs, what it thought was appropriate as far as trying to meet a particular height, where the knee should be, how long the thigh bone should be, and so forth. And it was really quite helpful. And I thought it was pretty ironic, considering that I feel like that's the technology potentially that we're toying with that may come back to haunt us in the end. I found some large pants from Goodwill, and I slit them up the back so that they would fit onto these giant legs. So to make the shoes, I just took some craft foam and heat formed it with a heat gun onto the feet, and used a little bit of floor matting as well, and repeated that process, adhering everything with some contact cement. There's my size 12 boot in comparison, and sprayed them with some black and put some rivets in them, and they were ready to go. Now, I wanted to include some bolts in his neck, obviously, and those were just some actual bolts I had in my garage. I inserted those and adhered them with a little bit of foam clay, and he was just about ready to start painting. So I based him out in black, and then I started applying some green. I had put a little bit of foam clay to create some abs and some other muscles, but I emphasized them with colors using some blacks and greens to highlight and shade everything. I created the shirt out of a bed sheet that I cut up the middle. I wanted to pay homage to the suit that he would have worn in the original films, and I just hot glued that a couple places to keep it in place. Added some chains for some detail, and he was just about finished. Okay, I'm not sure where I'm going to use this in the video, but I wanted to give you a size reference. I'm 6 foot tall. Check him out. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Ask any questions you have in the comments, like and follow along for more content like this, and as always, happy haunting.